Okay, this is going to be a lecture about the reproductive systems. I'm going to cover the main functions of the reproductive systems as well as the anatomical components of both the male and the female reproductive systems. So to get started, let's look over the embryonic development of the reproductive systems. Both systems actually are going to develop embryologically at the exact same time. So during fetal development, both female and male reproductive anatomical parts develop simultaneously. So the internal components are going to come from our mesoderm. So here we have mesoderm is going to form some genital ridges that are going to be next to the kidneys, medial to the kidneys. Okay, so if you guys remember, you have these long tubes that create the nephrons. So just medial to that, you're going to start to form some genital ridges. An interesting thing is that the germ cells, the cells that are going to form the sperm and the eggs, actually migrate from the yolk sac, which is outside of the body, and then gets pulled into the body during the folding of the gut tube. Okay, so you're going to have two different duct systems during embryonic development. One is the Wolffian, which is going to create the male duct system. So we're going to see that includes the vas deferens, as well as the seminiferous tubules, etc. The Mullerian is going to form the female duct system. So you're talking about the fallopian tubes as well as the uterus. So both of these two tubes actually are going to form together, and then what happens is if a Y chromosome is present, you will have a protein on that Y chromosome, or really a gene that creates a protein called SRY. When the SRY protein starts to be produced during embryonic development, what it actually is going to do is it's going to tell the Mullerian system to disintegrate or degrade, causing the male duct system only to be formed. So that's an interesting thing, because when that Y chromosome is not present, that means the fetus will become female. So the external genitalia for the male and female are going to develop from the same structures. Okay, so you're going to have a pair of elevated folds, the urogenital folds. Then you have the genital tubercle, which is going to be a rounded structure, and the labiosacral swellings, which are another set of elevated structures lateral to the ureteral folds. So let's look at this all in picture form so you guys understand exactly what is going to happen. So here is the embryo or the fetus developing around 4 to 6 weeks, where sexually they're going to have both the Mullerian and the Wolffian ducts. So if you can see this pink duct right here, that's one, okay? And then you have another set of ducts right there. And remember, those are medial to where the kidneys are going to be formed. The kidney is going to be right here and right here. Okay, so during embryonic development of the female, when that SRY protein, so you have no SRY protein, what happens is the Wolffian ducts are going to go away, and the Mullerian ducts continue to form the fallopian tube and the uterus. Okay, so this would be at birth. An interesting thing is that at birth, females have about 1 million eggs per ovary. So that means every female child that's born will have 2 million eggs at birth. Men are going to be different. Men actually don't create sperm during fetal development. So when the SRY protein is present, what happens is this Mullerian tube is going to go away, and the Wolffian duct actually forms, and that's going to form the testes as well as the vas deferens here and some of the other tubed system for the reproductive tract. You can see they actually look almost identical. The ovary here and the testes look very much the same, and the tube system looks very much the same also. So the external genitalia, at about 6 weeks, the fetus is going to be sexually indifferent, meaning you can't determine the sex just yet. But as the fetus continues to develop, you will see some ridges that are going to distinguish male from female. So here's how you can tell male from female, is that one, the erectile tissue that forms the penis is also going to form the clitoris. The clitoris, instead of being long and external, will actually develop internally here. But for the male, you're going to have the glans penis, or the tip of the penis, which will essentially be the same thing as the clitoris in women. The labia minor and major, right here and right here, will actually be very similar to the shaft of the penis, right here and right here. So that's how these two things are going to develop differently, forming different external genitalia. So the purpose of the reproductive systems should be pretty straightforward. The function is to create what's known as gametes, or sex cells. So the male reproductive system is going to produce sperm. The female reproductive system is going to produce ovaries. That means the primary or the main organs for this system are not going to be the penis and the vagina, but actually the organs that produce the sex cells. So for men, that is going to be the testes, and for women, that is going to be the ovaries. And they also are going to produce some hormones. So for men, the testes are going to produce testosterone, and for women, the ovaries will produce estrogen and progesterone. These are going to be the sex hormones, and they're going to do specific jobs. You'll probably learn a little bit more about that in physiology, but testosterone is going to help mature sperm. Estrogen will help with ovulation, and then a combination of estrogen plus progesterone will help the endometrial lining thicken in the uterus, preparing it for the implantation of the fertilized egg. Then the second part of the reproductive system is going to be the accessory organs. Essentially, what the accessory organs are going to do is they're just going to help either move gametes to their destination, or they can also create some fluids to help move the gametes to their intended destination. So this includes things like, you might see ducts later on and glands, and then of course the external genitalia are also accessory organs. Remember, movement of gametes or sex cells to their intended destination. So we're going to start with the male reproductive system and look at it in more depth. This is just an overview of the male reproductive system. So the external genitalia is going to include the penis as well as the scrotum. The scrotum is going to be this entire area here. So the skin plus the muscles that surround our primary organ right there, which is the testis, okay? you'll have a series of tubes that are going to move sperm out of the urethra. So those include this cup-shaped organ right here called the epididymis. The epididymis will essentially hold sperm, store it for roughly 20 days, and then it will make its way through our next tube here called the ductus deferens or the vas deferens during ejaculation. Sperm is going to move through the vas deferens, which actually goes into the body wall via the spermatic cord. So this area right here is going to be the spermatic cord. The spermatic cord includes the vas deferens plus any blood vessels. So the blood vessels that are going to come down to the testes, supplying nutrients, getting rid of waste. So you're gonna, once the vas deferens goes through the body wall, it's then going to split from the blood vessels. It's going to come up and over and around the back side of the bladder, where it's going to meet its first accessory gland called the seminal vesicle right here. So this thing right here is the seminal vesicle. So sperm travels through, well, really through right here, into the ejaculatory duct right there. This donut-shaped gland that's going to be at the base of the bladder is the second accessory gland. That's the prostate gland. So during sexual excitement, sperm is going to move and sit here in the ejaculatory duct. And essentially, the seminal vesicle is going to make roughly 70% of the fluid component of semen, because semen, sorry, my little writing pen thing is not working very well. Semen is going to be sperm plus fluid. So in order to have semen, you have to have this fluid portion. The fluid portion is mostly made by the seminal vesicle. The other portion is going to be made by the prostate gland, which is the other 30%. Okay, so that's our second main gland. So what happens is sperm is going to move here into the ejaculatory duct. Fluid from the seminal vesicle meets sperm, and then the prostate gland will also secrete some fluid in here as well. Then during ejaculation, the semen will move out of the urethra, which is through the penis. So we've already talked about, or we will talk about, the urethra for men. There are 3 different areas of the urethra. So one is the prostatic urethra right there. The second part is the membranous urethra, which is right here, roughly where the body wall is. And the third is the spongy urethra, which actually is the tube that is within the erectile tissue of the penis. The last gland that's going to be important is this one right here, and that's called the bulbourethral gland. It is at the root of the penis. This gland doesn't create semen or any of the fluid component of semen. What it does is it creates a pre-ejaculatory fluid. So because the urethra is going to move both sperm, which is essential for reproduction, as well as urine, you have to make sure that it gets cleansed before ejaculation. So the bulbourethral gland is going to secrete a fluid before ejaculation. So that will come out. It's going to clean out the urethra of any acidic urine. Then what happens is during ejaculation, then semen will actually be ejaculated, and there is no need to worry about the tube not being clean completely. So that's the overview of the male reproductive system. Now let me go into a little bit more detail. So the scrotum. The scrotum, as I said, is going to be the skin and the fascia that surround the testes and really the epididymis as well. Okay, it is going to hang away from the abdominal pelvic cavity, and the main reason for this is that because sperm production is going to be optimal at 2 to 3 degrees below body temperature. So this is why the scrotum has to hang away from the body wall. If not, then the testes are going to be too warm and sperm production is going to go down. If your testes are hanging too far away from the body, then that means the testes are too cold, and again, sperm production is going to go down. So in order to facilitate the correct position of the scrotum from the abdominal pelvic cavity, you're going to have a couple of muscles. So those include the dartos muscles as well as the cremaster muscles. So these are just bands of muscle that surround the testes. Okay, so the dartos muscles are smooth muscles. They cause the scrotum to look wrinkly and can help pull the scrotum closer to the body, especially on those cold days. The cremaster muscles are more skeletal-based muscles, and they can elevate the testes, again, if the scrotum is too cold, if the temperature is not correct. Okay. So surrounding the testes themselves, you're going to have two different connective tissue layers. So you're going to have a testis, which is kind of circular in structure. And then surrounding the testis itself, just to protect it all, is going to be a layer of fibrous connective tissue like that. And that's going to be our albuginea tunica. So I apologize, my pen's not working very well. There we go. So this bluish layer is going to be a very thin fibrous tunica layer that's going to protect the testes. Okay, then what you're going to have is you're going to have another layer. So this green layer is going to be the tunica vaginalis layer that's much thinner and actually will also come upward and be part of the spermatic cord as well. So this comes from the peritoneum. Basically, the peritoneum is going to come from the abdominal pelvic cavity, and as the testes descend, you have this little bit of thin serosa around it, and that's the tunica vaginalis layer, which is very oddly named. So looking at the pictures, what you want to be able to see is the external genitalia for the male. You can see right here, you have the testes. So this is the testes. This is going to be the epididymis right there. So the scrotum is going to be this outer skin layer right here. And then you can see you're going to have a dartos muscle right there. You're going to have your cremaster muscle right here. Remember, that's your skeletal muscle. Okay, so our skeletal muscle. And then you're going to have a very thin layer right here, which is going to be your vaginalis layer, okay, your tunica vaginalis layer. And then over the testes itself is going to be that thicker, dense connective tissue layer. So this picture kind of shows you some of those tissues layers a little bit better. So you have this outer skin right here. You have some superficial fascia right there, just below the skin, essentially, and that's going to create this septum right here. So each testis will be in its own sac that is separate from one another. Then you have your albuginea layer right there, okay? and then this is the vaginalis layer right there, which is it kind of is hard to see. It looks a little bit similar. So that's the vaginalis layer, and then you're going to have the albuginea layer, which is the white layer over the testy. Then the additional things are going to be the spermatic cord right here. Okay, so all the blood vessels plus the vas deferens, which are going to be surrounded by some skin and some fascia. It's going to go into the body wall. So this is actually the body wall right here. Once it goes through the body wall, that's going to be when the vas deferens actually, it's when the vas deferens will branch. So the vas deferens will be right here, and then blood vessels will be right next to it right here. Okay. So the penis is going to be the other external genitalia, and its function is to deliver sperm into the female reproductive tract. It's going to have a tube in the middle, which is going to be the urethra, which the urethra is really meant to allow for sperm to be delivered into the reproductive tract of a female. It's going to have a couple of different anatomical features that are really important. So one is going to be the erectile tissue, right? So no, the penis is not made of muscle. It is actually made of special connective tissue that becomes erect. As blood enters through arteries, what happens is that tissue expands and blood cannot leave out of veins, which means you actually have more blood flow into the area. Therefore, it actually gets bigger in size and erect. The two different erectile tissues are going to be the corpus spongiosum, okay, which actually is going to surround the urethra itself. Basically, what you have is you have a tube, which is going to be the urethra, and around that tube, you have a little bit of erectile tissue. And the purpose of that erectile tissue is to help make sure that that tube remains open during ejaculation. If not, then the other erectile tissue is going to cause that tube to actually pinch and close. The other two erectile tissues are called the corpora cavernosa. Essentially what they are two expansions that are going to be dorsal right above. So yes, it looks like a creepy face, but essentially that is what it looks like. This is the dorsal paired cavernosa, and then this one in right here is going to be the spongiosum. So here on this picture you can see, so this is the pubic symphysis. I'm sorry. This is the pubic symphysis right here. That means this is the pelvic area, the pelvic bone, well, the pelvic region. This is the penis. So you have the root of the penis, which actually attaches the erectile tissue internally. You have two paired dorsal erectile tissues. Then you have the glens penis. Okay, you will have the prepuce, which is essentially the foreskin of the penis. So you have a circumcised penis versus uncircumcised penis. If you want to learn about circumcision, the internet will tell you all about that. It's mostly for cleanliness, although it's now thought that this foreskin does have some sort of evolutionary significance in terms of sexual reproduction. Perhaps removing sperm out of the female reproductive tract if somebody was there before you. So there must be a reason for this. It's just not widely known what the reason is. So here is going to be a cross section, so you can see this weird looking face Honestly, it reminds me of a South Park character. I don't know why. But you have your corpus cavernosum right here, as well as right here. And then you'll have a central artery through each. So that's where blood enters. And then you have all of these like spaces where veins are going to be. So as blood enters into these arteries in the center, it's going to get full of blood. The erectile tissue is going to expand. That means blood can't leave out of the veins. So here's the spongy urethra right there, and then you just have a little bit more erectile tissue, the corpus spongiosum around. So you see how that's going to actually help ensure that this tube actually remains open. Otherwise, these two tubes would probably squish it closed, which would not be a very good thing. So the testes are going to be our main organ for the male reproductive system. Contrary to what you think, the penis is not the main organ, right? The testes are the main organ. They are going to be composed of something called seminiferous tubules, basically winding tubes in lobules or wedge-shaped areas within the testes. So if you take a cross section of the testes, it'll have kind of these wedges inside of it, and inside of those wedges are going to be spiraled seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules is where the germ cells will be held and where sperm is actually going to be produced. Then between these seminiferous tubules, you're going to have some cells called interstitial endocrine cells, and they're going to be the ones that produce testosterone. It's very similar for women as well. There's going to be an area where the egg is produced, or you guys are going to know as the oocyte, and then surrounding the oocyte are going to be other cells that create hormones. So here, let's look at the anatomy of the male reproductive system for the testes. So you see each of these little wedges, that's going to be our lobule, and then you have inside that lobule all of these winding tubes. That's going to be the seminiferous tubule. So if you take a cross section of the seminiferous tubule, you see the outer layer here of the tubule. Okay, and then what you're going to see is you're going to see cells on that outer ring. The outer ring cells are very important because those are like your stem cells for sperm production. Those are the ones that are going to divide, and when they do, they divide and create a cell that pushes towards the lumen. So this is going to be the lumen of the tube. Okay, so as sperm develop, they actually are going to move towards the lumen of the tube. And so now you can see the heads of the sperm and all the flagella like that. They kind of get sucked into the lumen of the tube, and then they're going to move towards the big cup-shaped portion right here, which is going to surround the testes. That is called the epididymis. So that right there. Sperm moves from the seminiferous tubules into the epididymis. You're going to have some other cells here which are going to help with movement, and then you're going to have your interstitial cells as well, and your cells that produce testosterone. Okay, so those interstitial cells are going to be the in-between cells, the cells between the tubules, so kind of like here-ish. So in our picture, this cell right here, which is going to make hormones, okay? So it's going to make testosterone. So how does spermatogenesis work? Well, it's really complicated. You have to know the difference between mitosis and meiosis. But essentially, you're going to have something called meiosis, which is going to be cell division for gametes or for sex cells. Okay. Normally, regular mitosis, what happens is you have one cell will divide and create two daughter cells that are identical. In meiosis, what actually happens is this one cell, this is my one cell, it will divide and create 4 daughter cells. Okay, each of these daughter cells down here for mitosis will have the same number of chromosomes, so 2N chromosomes, or roughly for a human that is 46 chromosomes. 46 chromosomes. In meiosis, what happens is you actually have to create daughter cells that have half the number of chromosomes, so 23 chromosomes. And the reason for this is if you have a cell that has 23, you have to actually allow another cell with 23 to fertilize together to create an embryo with 46 cells. If you don't do this and you try to fuse cells that go through mitosis, well, you have 46 for that cell, and it fuses with another cell of 46, which basically is going to give you too many chromosomes, which is not good. So you have to go through meiosis, and meiosis is 2 rounds of cell division. So what I want you to understand from this picture is the idea that you have this spermatogonium, or what I like to really refer to as a stem cell for sperm, is going to be on the outermost layer of the testes. It is then going to divide right here. It does divide mitotically so that one cell can become 2 cells, and then each of these new cells is going to go through 2 rounds of meiosis in order to create 1, 2, 3, 4 sperm cells, okay, towards the lumen of the seminiferous tubule. So if you don't do a round of mitotic divisions up here, basically what would happen is this cell would divide into 4, then you don't have a beginning cell anymore, which is really bad. This picture is also pretty good because it shows you those interstitial cells. These interstitial cells are the cells that are going to help you create the testosterone hormones. You also have another cell called this sustenticular cell, which helps to move the maturing sperm towards the lumen. So this is going to be how sperm develop from a cell. It's going to start to mature a little bit more. Normally what's going to be here inside the lumen is actually going to be this cell right here, which still has a little bit of a cytoplasm wing. The mature sperm, which will have a head, it will have a neck and a flagella, will actually mature in the epididymis. Okay, the sperm also has this little cap, kind of makes it look like it's got a war hat on. This is called the acrosome. It's going to contain enzymes to help the sperm break through the surrounding barrier of the egg. So the epididymis. The epididymis is the cup-shaped portion that is going to surround the testes. So this cup-shaped portion you guys saw in lab, okay, this is going to be the epididymis right here. It's going to have pseudostratified columnar cells in it. Essentially, that is going to help allow for sperm to move through very easily. It usually takes about 20 days for sperm to move all the way through, and during that time it will gain the ability to swim That doesn't mean that it's going to move its flagella. It just gets rid of that extra cytoplasm around the head. So the next stop is going to be the ductus deferens, or what I usually call the vas deferens. Okay, so you have the epididymis. The epididymis is then going to attach to the vas deferens. So sperm is going to be stored here. It's going to be stored in the epididymis. During sexual excitement, then sperm is then going to be moved to the next tube, which is the ductus deferens. Okay. So it is going to meet the seminal vesicle at the ejaculatory duct. Here you have smooth muscles in the wall of the tube just to help you move sperm along a little bit easier. So as we kind of talked about already, a vasectomy is essentially what when you cut this tube and you ligate it, or that's called burn or tie the two ends to get like separated from each other. So how they do this is the scrotum right here. They'll make a little incision in the scrotum, they pull out the ductus deferens, and they tie off the ends right here and right here, or they burn it so that those two ends are not actually connected together anymore. They'll stick the tube back in, stitch the patient up. It's pretty much a couple hours, and then it's not a very bad recovery. It's a very effective birth control measure. It can actually be reversed with really good success rates as well. So as sperm is going to move towards the urethra, its first stop is going to be at the ejaculatory duct at the base of the seminal vesicles, because it now has to pick up the fluid component of semen. So the seminal vesicle is going to be on the backside or the posterior side of the bladder. It's where you are going to have the ejaculatory duct. So basically the seminal vesicle ampulla plus the ductus deferens are going to come together, forming the ejaculatory duct. This is going to make 70% of the semen fluid volume. Okay, so fluid volume, sorry. The fluid volume, like that. 70% of this fluid volume. So the seminal vesicle fluid is usually alkaline. What that means is basic. Okay, that just means not acidic. It also will include a couple of other important things like prostaglandins, which actually help with uterine contractions. It includes things like fructose, because you need a power source, and I'll explain that in a minute. The other 30% of the semen volume is going to come from the prostate. So the prostate is going to be kind of a donut-shaped gland at the base of the bladder. The prostatic urethra is going to go right through it, and its secretions are going to be a little bit more acidic, kind of a milky in color. What this is going to do is provide some components that actually fight the female reproductive system, because actually the female reproductive system secretes different types of mucus that prevent foreign invaders. So during reproduction, what happens is the male reproductive system actually has to overcome the female reproductive system trying to kill off all the sperm that are entering it. And some of the seminal fluid actually does that. The bulbourethral gland is the last one. It's going to be inferior to the prostate gland, usually at the roughly around the root of the penis, kind of where the body wall is. And this is going to produce a clear mucus that gets secreted first, basically before ejaculation, to neutralize the acidic components of urine. It also lubricates the penis as well. Okay, so the urethra. So once you go all through the vas deferens, you meet up at the ejaculatory duct, you get all the fluid components together. You now have to move semen, so that includes sperm plus fluid, out of the urethra. The urethra, if you remember, is going to have three components for men. The prostatic urethra, which goes through the prostate, the membranous urethra, which goes through the body wall diaphragm, as well as the spongy urethra, which runs through the penis. So looking back at all of this stuff again, here's what we have. We have our testes right here, where we're making sperm. Okay, we have each one of these lobules. We have our seminiferous tubules. So sperm is going through division. It's coming through right here. And then it's going to go into the epididymis to be matured and to move like that. So during sexual arousal, sperm is then going to travel through the vas deferens, which is going to go through the body wall, up and around to the back side of the bladder. So this is the posterior view. This is the back of the bladder. Okay, these are the seminal vesicles. So sperm is then going to sit right here in the ejaculatory duct and wait for the fluid components of semen. So the seminal vesicles are going to add part of its component, and then the prostate's going to add the other fluid component. Semen is then going to move through the urethra out the penis, right? So here's where the bulbourethral glands are, right there. So don't forget, they're going to secrete a clear mucus before ejaculation to cleanse out the urethra. So you should see the corpus cavernosa and then the corpus spongiosum, which is actually going to encircle the entire urethra and also become the glans or the glands portion of the penis. Okay, so this is again just to show you, here's where the prostatic urethra is, the membranous urethra, the spongy urethra. So semen is going to be made of sperm as well as secretions. So sperm will have a head like this, and that head includes the nucleus or the DNA that is going to merge with the egg. Just on the outer portion, right here, probably a little bit more, but basically like the cap of the sperm is going to be the acrosome, which is going to contain enzymes that help to penetrate the egg. The egg will have a really thick outer layer because it's a really big cell. So it's going to have a plasma membrane, but then it secretes another additional layer to protect itself. In order for sperm to get through that, it actually has to release these enzymes to break through that outer layer so that the head of the sperm can enter. This mid piece is going to be where mitochondria are. The mitochondria are needed to power the flagella. Okay? So remember, this is the only cell in the human body that has a long whip-like flagella. In order to power this or to twist it around, you need ATP. Mitochondria is going to help you make that ATP. So why does sperm need a fluid component? Well, it needs a fluid component for several reasons. One, you need fructose. Fructose is a type of sugar. And if you guys remember from cellular respiration, you need sugar and oxygen in order to make our ATP, especially in the presence of mitochondria. So basically, the sperm has to take its own energy source with it on its journey. So that's why you're going to have fructose, you have other components that actually protect the sperm and then activate the sperm. Usually that activation occurs as a result of being in the female reproductive tract. So there's enzymes that interact with the female reproductive system that is going to help activate the sperm and facilitate the movement. It's going to neutralize the acidity of the male urethra as well as the female vagina, because like I said, the vagina is trying to prevent anything foreign from entering. Finally, our prostaglandins. Prostaglandins actually help with uterine contractions. So, I know there's this idea or this old wives' tale that women who are pregnant and want to make sure they give birth sooner rather than later, they tell you to go home and have sex. But it actually is true, because sperm is going to have those prostaglandins that cause the uterus muscles to contract. Because the idea is this flagella is only going to get the sperm so far. So if you have a long journey to go, because if this is the uterus and you're barely right here, okay, so we'll see in the female reproductive system, you actually are going to have, sperm and egg meet in here in the fallopian tube. So just imagine your sperm has to travel all the way up into the fallopian tube before it meets the egg. So that means if the uterus contracts and gets smaller, the sperm actually doesn't have to travel as far. So that's a good thing for the sperm. Okay, that's the male reproductive tract. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't have too many crazy anatomical things that you really have to study hard. So let's go into the female reproductive system. So the female reproductive system is a little more complicated in some respects and a little less complicated in other respects. So looking at the overview, you should see that it's different than the male reproductive system. One, all of the important organs are internal. There are no external organs that are essential for the female reproductive system. The main organ is right here, and that is the ovary. The ovary is also going to have that albuginea layer around it, protecting it. In order for the eggs to move, you're going to have a tube that surrounds the ovary. That is called the uterine tube. It's also called the fallopian tube. It's most commonly referred to as the fallopian tube. It is going to connect to the uterus. So this flattened almost looking tube is the uterus right here. This is the uterus. The uterus is going to be in the middle. So you should see the bladder right here. You should see the urethra here. The uterus is going to be situated posterior to that. And then women are going to have another canal for the vagina. The most posterior is going to be the rectum and the anus. So you want to remember the urethra comes first, the vagina comes next, the rectum is going to be the most posteriorly situated. In terms of external genitalia, The woman is going to have a mons pubis, which is actually this little mound right here in the front of the reproductive system. She will have two skin folds, one here, which is going to be the labia majora, and then this one more internal is the labia minora. This is going to be the vaginal opening. Here is the urinary opening, or the urethral opening. Okay, so pretty straightforward. The other thing is going to be the clitoris, which is the same erectile tissue that forms the penis. So that same cavernosa tissue will be found in the most anterior for the female reproductive system. So actually that's in front of the urethra as well. Okay, so looking at the external genitalia of a woman, you have a couple of different terms that we're going to break down as simply as we can. You have something called the vulva. Okay, the vulva is essentially all of this, all of that. All of the external genitalia of a woman is called the vulva. You have a labia majora, which is going to be this outer fold. Okay, you have a labia minora right there, which is going to be your inner fold. So the labia majora is going to be equivalent to the male scrotum. The labia minora is going to be the inner fold, and that's where you should find the clitoris. So it's kind of hard to see because there's a lot of arrows pointed here, but you basically have a prepuce, which is similar to the male foreskin, and then right behind that is going to be the clitoris, which is equivalent to the male penis erectile tissue. The vestibule is going to be this whole area, so where it is in green. Well, okay, we're going to make it red. This area right here is the vestibule. Over here on this picture, this area right here is the vestibule. It is where the urethral opening is, as well as the vaginal opening. So there's the urethral opening, this is the vaginal opening. So pretty straightforward. So for women, the main organ is going to be the ovaries. They're small little almond-shaped organs that you've seen in your dissections. They're not very big. They will have a fibrous tunica albuginea around it, just as to hold everything in place and together. And then in order to hold the ovary inside of the woman's body cavity, there's going to be a little bit of ligaments and mesenteries to do that. The most important things are going to be the ligaments and then the broad ligament. So what you're going to have is you're going to have an ovary. And essentially the ovary is not attached to anything. It is floating in the woman's body cavity. In order to make sure that it gets plastered to different areas, you're going to have ligaments. So one is a suspensory ligament, which is going to come off laterally and attaches to the posterior pelvic wall. The ovarian ligament is going to come this way, right there, medial, and it's going to attach to the lateral surface of the uterus. Without those two ligaments, the ovary would not be attached to anything, because this is not a tube here and this is not a tube here. It's just the same thing as a ligament that you would see in the muscular system, so just dense connective tissue. Then what you're going to have is, to make sure all of that gets suspended correctly, you're going to have a broad ligament. So the suspensory ligament and the mesoovarium are part of this. Basically, you have a connective tissue sheet here, like this, creating a broad wing that holds the ovary in place. The mesoovarium is up here, The broad ligament is the whole entire wing. Okay? So let's look at that. All of this, you see all of that layer right here, that's all of the broad ligament. This portion right here is the mesoovarium. Forgive that name right there. This is a different book's picture. You see up here a suspensory ligament, and you see right here an ovarian ligament. Okay, you'll have another one called the round ligament as well, but we're just going to know this one and this one. So that's going to hold the ovary in place. Really, the suspensory ligament's going to hold the fallopian tube, but it has part of this broad ligament, and that's going to surround the entire thing. So here's what the ovary is going to look like in a lateral section. It's going to have a medulla area, so it's going to have a middle area right here, and then it's going to have a cortex area. The middle medulla area is going to be blood vessels. The outer cortex area is going to be where your follicles are going to grow. Or really, you could probably just write your oocytes. Okay. So this has a lot of stuff on it. This slide, I'm going to tell you what I want you to really focus on. I want you to understand that the ovarian follicles are going to be embedded in the cortex. So remember, you've got these two areas. This is the cortex, right, like that. That is where all of your follicles are going to be. And yes, I know it says follicle, so you think about hair, but follicle just means a set of cells that surround something else. So for a hair follicle, it's a set of cells that surround where the hair is growing out of. Here is the same thing, a set of cells that surround the immature egg, and the immature egg is now going to be called an oocyte. So basically, you're going to have an egg like that, an immature cell. And around it, you're going to have a layer of cells. Those are the follicle cells. So together, the oocyte plus the follicle cells create the ovarian follicle. The follicle around here is going to be really essential because those are going to develop and grow during ovulation. Well, not ovulation, but during the ovarian cycle, these cells grow. So essentially, you will have another layer that grows and develops during the ovarian cycle. Okay? That's kind of what you want to understand. There's a lot of other stuff going on here that you'll have. If you have more than one layer, you have the granulosa cells. This is going to start to form a fluid-filled area called the antrum. And that fluid-filled area is going to allow for the oocyte to actually be ejected out of the follicle. So during ovulation, what happens is the oocyte busts out of this thing and literally opens up a hole in the ovary, so the oocyte gets ejected out. Okay, these cells, these follicle cells, are then going to become the corpus luteum, which is going to be something that secretes a little bit of estrogen and mostly progesterone to help with the endometrial lining developing. But here is that whole process. So in the cortex, at birth, a girl is going to have 1 million of these primordial follicles, or these beginning follicles. So that means they've gone through the process of mitosis, they've increased in number, and then they start to go through meiosis, but they get stalled, so they stop meiosis. Then during ovulation, then during the ovarian cycle, one or more of these follicles are chosen to go through the cycle of maturing. So you start to have a thickening of these follicle cells around the oocytes right here in the middle, and then more thickening. Usually at some point only one is destined to thicken even more. Then you have this antral or fluid-filled area right here. You have more of that maturing, until finally you have ovulation right here. Essentially, like I said, the oocyte pushes out of the wall of the ovary. These follicle cells here become this corpus luteum, which is going to make more estrogen and progesterone during the next phase. The follicle cells here actually produce estrogen as well during the ovarian cycle to help actually create more estrogen and to allow for ovulation to occur. So once ovulation occurs, the egg then has to be swept up into the uterine tube, which has three names: uterine tube, fallopian tube, or the oviducts. This fallopian tube is the most commonly used term, so I'll try to use that more often. But basically, the fallopian tube is where the oocyte moves towards the uterus. It is also going to be the site of fertilization. That is a very important thing. The uterus is not where fertilization occurs. The uterus is where the embryo implants. Okay? So this is why people can have tubal pregnancies, essentially because if you have the sperm and the egg meeting during fertilization, and then it accidentally implants into the fallopian tube, then the embryo is going to start to grow as if it were in the lining of the uterus. The fallopian tube has three distinct regions: the isthmus, which is just the area where the tube joins the uterus; the ampulla, which is where the tube curves around the ovary; and the infundibulum, which is going to be the expansion near the ovary. Okay, so this is called distal because we're talking about in relationship to the uterus. So the isthmus will be here. So this is my uterus. I know it's not the greatest drawing, but kind of works. That's the isthmus right there. Then you're going to have the ampulla, which is going to be the curved portion, and then the infundibulum. Okay, the infundibulum is where your fimbriae are going to be. So just kind of remember the F and the F go together. So the fimbriae are going to be part of the infundibulum. The ampulla is going to be next, and then the isthmus is going to be last. Isthmus usually means like the neck region, so this would be the neck region right here. The uterus itself is actually a hollow muscular organ that is going to have a couple different functions. One, implantation of the embryo, fetal development, and menstruation. Menstruation is not exactly a function. It's an effect of not having implantation of the embryo. I would not say that that is a function of the uterus. It's just a byproduct of the lack of embryo implantation. The uterus is going to have a couple of different regions, just very similar to the stomach. A fundus, which is the rounded area; an isthmus, which is going to be the neck area; the body is the main area. The cervix is going to be where the isthmus is going to meet the vagina, and then you have these different cervical canals. One is going to be the external OS, the other is the internal OS. So basically where the vagina and the uterus meet, or where the body meets. So I guess I don't have pictures of that. We'll go back here. Sorry about that. Okay, so you're going to have here the fundus. This is going to be the body right there. This is going to be the cervix area. Here is the vagina. Okay, this is the external OS. The internal OS is going to be the tube, right like that. So I got the isthmus is the only last one. The isthmus is going to be the neck region right there. Okay, so histology, you want to know the outer layer is the perimetrium. The middle layer is going to be the myometrium. Remember, myo means muscle. So this is the smooth muscle layer that is going to contract, usually during birth. This is where oxytocin is going to target. Oxytocin is going to cause the muscle to contract more. And what happens is the baby's head hits the cervix, and that's going to relay back to the brain, and essentially the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to then secrete more oxytocin out of the posterior pituitary gland. Okay? The innermost layer is the endometrium. That is the important one, the endometrium. It is going to be modified epithelial tissue that allows for implantation of the developing embryo. That is the important thing to understand. In this picture, this whole layer right here is the endometrial layer. It has two separate divisions, a basalis layer and a functionalis layer. The basalis layer is this base layer. This is the layer that is going to create the new functionalis layer after menstruation. The functionalis layer, this is the layer that is going to get thick and full right after ovulation and prepare for implantation. So this is the layer that will have lots of blood vessels in it. This is why menstruation it has blood, because all of this layer has a significant blood supply to it, because this is the layer that's going to help form the placenta when the egg actually implants. The vagina is going to be attached to the uterus. It's just going to be a tube that allows for childbirth, for intercourse, and a way for menstrual flow to exit. It's going to be, remember, you want to remember this, it's going to be posterior to the urethra but anterior to the rectum. So in terms of its histology, it's going to be a tube. So as you've seen all of our tubes, it's got a mucosa layer. In this case, that mucosa layer is stratified squamous. It has rugae, which means, you guys have seen, it's a similar thing in the stomach. It has ridges, okay? The next layer is going to be a smooth muscle layer, and then the outermost layer is an adventitia, which is just loose CT. So remember, loose connective tissue, that's just going to allow that to be plastered to the walls around it, okay? So the mucosa near the vaginal orifice or opening, it kind of forms a little bit of a partition right here, and that's the hymen. So the hymen can get ruptured with intercourse, but it's also possible that it gets ruptured in other ways as well. Okay, so let's go over all of that stuff using this picture. So here you have, let's start with the uterus. You have the fundus of the uterus right there. You're going to have the isthmus. You see how it constricts right here? That's going to be our isthmus. The internal OS is this internal canal. You have a cervical canal, and then you have an external OS right there. All of that makes up the cervix. So the cervix is all of this part right here, really right here. From the internal OS down is the cervix. All right. This is going to be the vaginal canal. You see the ridges right there. Those are the rugae. You have your endometrial layer, your myometrial layer, and your perimetrial layer, like that. This portion right here is the body of the uterus, okay? So this picture, you can see the oocyte is right here. It's being ovulated. It's going to move into the infundibulum. And really those fimbriae right here, these finger-like projections, what they do is they sweep and they pull the oocyte upwards. If they don't work very well, what happens is the oocyte can actually end up falling out into the body wall simply because there's not enough suction upward, or maybe the fallopian tube is not close enough, because this is not connected together. It's just a little like cup over the ovary. The ampulla is this curved area right here, and then you have the isthmus right there, or the neck portion. So the endometrial layer is going to have this thick layer right there. That's going to be the endometrium, and then this is the muscle layer, or the myometrial layer for the uterus. So don't forget, this is our ovarian ligament, suspensory ligament. This whole wing right here is the broad ligament, and it does include this portion up here, which is going to be between the fallopian tube and the ovarian ligament, and that is the meso-ovarium. Ovarium. Sorry. This pen doesn't like Max very much. Okay, so that's the end of the reproductive systems lecture. If you guys have any questions, you're free to send me an email before your test, and I can try to answer any questions you might have. Okay? Hopefully it wasn't too confusing.